I remember the weight of the key in my hand. It was heavier than usual, maybe because of the 5-hour flight I'd just landed from, or maybe because of the little velvet box tucked into my pocket, an anniversary surprise. I'd told him I wouldn't be back until Sunday evening. I wanted to see his face, that surprised, beautiful face, when I showed up early. The soft click of the key turning the lock. The door eased open. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet for him. I kicked off my heels just inside the threshold, a smile already pulling at my lips. I took 3 steps down the hallway. 3 steps that erased 3 years of my life. I didn't need to see everything. The bedroom door was ajar, and the sliver of light from inside was enough. He was there. Arif. But he wasn't alone. The man he was holding was pressed against him, their movements too fluid, too intimate to be anything but what they were. It wasn't just a kiss. It was an occupation. I clamped down on my breath immediately. I froze, hidden just out of sight. I should have screamed. I should have thrown the key, the box, the heavy suitcase. But I didn't. Grief was waiting, but first, the cold. The utter, paralyzing cold settled in. Then I heard his voice, pitched low, a voice I thought was reserved only for me. It was getting ridiculous. The engagement plans, the constant questions about the mortgage. Maya is wonderful, she's stable, yes, but she's just a cover. The other man chuckled. A human security blanket? Exactly, Arif confirmed, a sneer in his tone. A beautiful, utterly predictable security blanket that bankrolls the good life. But you, Rohan, you get me the entree. You get the real deals. She would never understand that. She's too busy being sensible. The word sensible felt like a blow, but the word cover was a bullet. It wasn't just betrayal. It was contempt. He hadn't cheated because he slipped up. He'd cheated because he used me. And he was laughing about it. I squeezed the velvet box in my pocket until my knuckles ached. The ring wasn't an accessory anymore, it was a weapon. I backed away silently, every muscle fighting the urge to shatter something. I slipped out, pulling the door closed with the softest thud possible. Outside, the tears never came. Tears were a luxury, a release I couldn't afford. All the pain, all the humiliation, curdled into one single, powerful thought, balance. The next 24 hours were the most difficult performance of my life. I came back the following evening, acting tired, slightly disheveled, but utterly oblivious. He rushed me, kissing me with a manufactured warmth that tasted like a lie. He was nervous, overly attentive, classic guilt. I let him believe it was working. I missed you too, Arif. Rough flight, I told him, forcing a smile. Let me just unpack and hit the shower. I didn't unpack. I opened my laptop. The tears were gone, replaced by a forensic focus. I wasn't looking for proof of the affair, I had that. I was looking for his weakness. He was ambitious to the point of recklessness, craving the high-stakes risk that would make him rich and famous overnight. It took me 3 nights of sleepless, ruthless searching through his seemingly secure files. I knew all his passwords, of course, the ones based on our memories. But I found something new. A hidden account. It wasn't just a small investment. It was a massive, uninsured, high-risk loan from an offshore company. A loan he'd taken out to buy shares in the very development firm Rohan's circle was pushing. He was leveraged to the hilt. If that investment went south, he wouldn't just lose his money, he could be facing serious legal exposure for fudging his books to qualify for the loan in the first place. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was armed. The game plan crystallized. I wouldn't confront him and watch him crash. I would be the engineer of the crash. I would stand next to him, pretending to be his biggest support, all the way until he hit the ground. I called my old colleague, Kabir. He runs a boutique risk analysis firm, a man who understands how to make things appear at exactly the right time. I didn't tell Kabir the truth. I told him I needed discreet analysis on a competing firm that was involved in questionable offshore lending practices. I needed to know every single pressure point, every loophole. I needed to know how to trigger an audit without anyone tracing it back to me. Kabir warned me, "This is complicated, Maya. It's not about hacking. It's about planting the right kind of information in the right kind of ear. You need patience. And you need a flawless alibi." Patience was easy. When the desire for vengeance burns this deep, waiting becomes a pleasure. A flawless alibi? I already had one. It was my beautiful, trusting, utterly predictable life with Arav. That night, he came home late, stressed and complaining. He rubbed my shoulders, calling me his rock, his anchor. He said he didn't know what he'd do without my stability. I smiled and squeezed his hand. "I'll always take care of you, Arav. Don't worry about a thing." He had no idea how true that was. I was going to take care of him, all right. I was going to take care of his entire, fraudulent life. The weeks that followed were a study in performance art. I became his greatest fan, his most loving partner, and his most subtle predator. I was radiant. I went back to the gym, bought new clothes, and took on new responsibilities at work. I wasn't doing it for him, I was doing it for the mask. The mask of a woman so secure, so oblivious, that betrayal would be the last thing on her mind. Arav noticed. He was thrilled. He saw my transformation not as self-improvement, but as a reflection of his own magnetic influence. He became complacent, basking in the glow of my manufactured happiness, never suspecting it was the calm before the storm. But I also started pulling away, subtly. I had sudden late meetings, new investment hobbies, and mysterious old friends I was catching up with. This wasn't to punish him, it was to make him feel a quiet anxiety beneath his complacency, the fear that he might lose the stability he secretly despised but desperately relied on. The first move was on his career. Arav's biggest client, Meridian Holdings, was also a client of my company's biggest competitor. Using the vulnerability I'd found, that massive offshore loan, I worked with Kabir to plant the first seed of doubt. We didn't send a screaming accusation. We sent a single, perfectly timed, anonymous email to Meridian's CFO, citing a general need for due diligence on employees associated with high-risk, unregulated investment groups based out of Cyprus. No names, just enough detail to spook a firm that prides itself on being above board. Within 2 days, Arav was pulled into an internal audit. He was furious, flustered, and panicked. He came home ranting about his paranoid bosses. He never once looked at me with suspicion, he looked at me with relief. "They're going to put me under the microscope, Maya," he stressed, running a frantic hand through his hair. "If they find the Cyprus loan, it's over. My whole career, Rohan, the deal, gone." I was calm. Too calm. "Honey, you're the best. Just stick to the facts," I murmured, rubbing his back. "But maybe, for appearances, you should put your biggest assets into my name. Just temporarily. For stability. If things get shaky at your firm, they can't touch our home or our accounts." It was a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. I presented the cage as a shield. He didn't hesitate. He was desperate and completely blind to the fact that his greatest threat wasn't his boss, it was the woman offering him comfort. The next move was on Rohan. Arav was using Rohan for status, I used Rohan to sow discord. I engineered a weekend trip, a romantic getaway that I knew would fall flat because Arav was too stressed. I made sure to invite a mutual acquaintance who was loose-lipped and slightly resentful of Arav's quick rise. I spent the whole evening being effortlessly charming, the perfect host, while subtly guiding the conversation. I brought up an old lie Arav had told Rohan about his university background, a minor fabrication, but one designed to undermine his sincerity. Then, in a quiet moment, I leaned toward Rohan. "Arav speaks so highly of you," I said sweetly. "He told me he admires your connections. He's always telling me, Rohan is the key to everything. You are a very important person in his life." The compliment was delivered with such a careful, pitying tone that it landed like an insult. Rohan's face hardened. He realized he wasn't being courted for his charm, he was being used for his key. The wedge was set. Rohan started to become distant, cold. Arav, now fighting fires at work, didn't have the mental capacity to fix the damage I had caused. The final phase of part 2 was the crucible. Arav's professional hit became terminal. The internal audit found the offshore loan, forcing him to resign before he could be fired and investigated further. He was financially ruined and professionally exiled. He came home broken. He tried to cry, tried to apologize for the stress he'd put me through, never for the betrayal. He was distraught, but for all the wrong reasons. Maya, it's all gone. Everything. Meridian, the deals. I have nothing left but you, he whispered, clinging to me. I pulled out the papers I had prepared days ago, documents transferring his last remaining liquid assets and the ownership of our apartment fully and unequivocally into my name. Kabir had made them airtight. Don't worry, I said, my voice steady, my eyes clear. I have a solution. I found an investor, a brilliant woman who believes in your vision, not your firm. But she requires ironclad proof of partnership and trust. We need to formalize your relationship with my new business venture, and for that, we need to completely separate your old, damaged assets from the new ones. It's for protection. He didn't read them. He couldn't. He was desperate, seeing me as his last lifeboat. He saw the transfer of assets as an act of selfless love, the ultimate show of faith. He saw me as his only hope to climb back to the status he desperately needed to impress Rohan. He picked up the pen and signed. As he finished the last signature, slumping back in the chair, relieved, I walked to the window. I could feel the victory coursing through me, cold and metallic. He had just handed me the complete, legal foundation of his life. He was broke, jobless, and utterly dependent. And he was still my boyfriend. See? I said, turning to him with a perfectly convincing smile. I told you I'd take care of you. Now, let the fire burn the paper. We're ready for the grand finale. I didn't want a quiet kitchen confrontation, I wanted an audience. Arav needed to fall from the height he desperately tried to reach. I chose a large gala, a high-profile fundraiser hosted by Rohan's powerful social circle, the very world Arav had tried to use to escape me. I convinced Arav to attend. He was resistant, claiming he couldn't face Rohan after his professional fall, but I insisted, promising I would introduce him to my new investor, the fictitious woman who held the key to his professional salvation. He dressed in borrowed confidence and walked in clinging to my arm, completely unaware he was walking into his own execution. I let him flounder for an hour, watching him try to network, watching Rohan coldly evade him. Then, I took the stage. I didn't introduce an investor. I introduced myself. I raised my champagne flute and tapped it gently. The room went quiet. I started with a toast to Arav, a beautifully worded, devastatingly false testament to his ambition and drive. We are here tonight, I began, my voice clear and carrying, to celebrate authenticity and success. And I want to thank Arav for finally showing me both. For 3 years, Arav has been trying to climb the ladder of success, and I was happy to be the rock he stood on. Tonight, however, the rock is moving. Arav's smile froze. He looked at me, confused, sensing the shift, but unable to grasp the magnitude. You all know Arav as a sharp businessman, I continued, but what you may not know is how sharp he is at covering his tracks. When I came home a few weeks ago, I found him not just in another man's arms, specifically Rohan's, but I overheard something far more damaging. I heard him call me a cover. A sensible security blanket to bankroll his ascent. A gasp ran through the room. Rohan instantly backed away from Arav, his face a mask of furious humiliation. Arav's eyes were wide, darting between me and the crowd. He started to stammer, a pathetic, desperate sound. No, Maya, don't. It's not. I cut him off, raising my hand. Oh, it is. But the romantic betrayal was just the start. The real betrayal was financial. I didn't need to shout, the silence of the room was my megaphone. I then detailed, with shocking precision, the elaborate scheme of the offshore loans and the fraudulent reporting that led to his resignation, presenting it as a direct consequence of his arrogance and recklessness. I didn't say I caused it, I simply exposed his actions, now that he was financially stripped bare. A few days ago, I finished, my voice like ice. Arav signed over the last of his assets to me for protection, believing I was funding his comeback. He was using me, even in his ruin. But the only thing he protected was me, from the consequences of his inevitable collapse. As of tonight, he is unemployed, uninsured, and legally owns nothing but the clothes on his back. The scene erupted. The wealthy attendees turned their backs on him. Rohan, who realized he was merely a discarded accessory in Arav's larger, failed game, threw his drink on the floor and vanished into the crowd. Arav stumbled toward me, his face twisted into a mask of pure, violent rage. "You cold, calculating bitch. You planned this. You ruined me," he hissed, his voice cracking. I looked at him, and for the first time I felt nothing but professional closure. No love, no anger, only observation. "Ruin is relative, Arav," I replied, my voice quiet, "just for him. You took my dignity, I took your foundation. You used me as a cover, I used you as a lesson. You thought I was a security blanket. I was actually the parachute you cut yourself loose from. Now, enjoy the fall." I took off the expensive diamond earrings he'd bought me months ago and dropped them on the floor near his feet. A final, glittering insult. Then, I turned my back on him for good. I didn't look back as the chaos consumed him. I walked straight out of the gala, into the cool night air. I got into a waiting car driven by Kabir. "That was brutal, Maya," Kabir said, handing me a cashmere shawl. "Are you okay?" I let the air out of my lungs for what felt like the first time in weeks. I looked at the dark city skyline, lit up by the promise of opportunity. "I'm more than okay, Kabir," I said, a small, genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. "The feeling isn't joy, it's clarity. Revenge didn't make me happy, but it cleared the path for me to be." I had the apartment, the liquidated funds from his accounts, and the moral satisfaction of having exposed a fraud. I used the money not to spite him, but to fund my own, legitimate company, a venture focused on ethical investments and transparent dealings. I was building a life that was stable, not because it was a cover, but because it was real. 6 months later, Kabir and I were having a celebratory dinner for my new company's launch. He raised his glass. "So, the great architect of vengeance," he mused. "Any regrets about the scorched earth policy?" I raised my glass to meet his. The ice was broken, the wound had healed, leaving behind a hard, bright scar. "Regret is for the weak, Kabir. I just balanced the books." I took a long sip of champagne, feeling the effervescence of my new beginning. I looked out at the streetlights, at the bustling, honest world. I was no longer the betrayed girlfriend or the vengeful architect. I was simply Maya, stepping forward, unburdened, into a future she had built entirely for herself.